Well, hi, my name is Angelene. Thank you so much for coming. Today, I'm going to be speaking about removing the stigma of mental health using social media. Now, last December, I was in a mental rehabilitation facility for 30 days. I was at Avalon, Malibu, and when I was first admitted, I thought that everyone was going to be crazy there. I thought that there's going to be a lot of screaming, a lot of violence, a lot of panic all the time. I thought that people were going to be really abnormal, kind of psycho almost. I expected there to be fights broken out. I didn't expect to get along with anybody. However, I met a lot of really cool, normal people, some of the best people that I've ever met in my life. One of my friends who was there was an alcoholic, but he was also an award-winning TV writer in Hollywood. One of my friends also graduated from Duke University with a law degree, practiced law for 10 years, and is now studying to be a nurse. And one of my friends is currently in Australia surfing, and he's just taking a break from college. And these are some of the best people that I've ever met because they were so authentic and vulnerable. They were upfront with their story. They were raw. They were honest. And they didn't hide their struggles. Before I met them, I thought that I was alone. I thought that I was the only one who had major depression and generalized anxiety disorder, to the point where I couldn't wake up in the morning to go to school. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't function on a day-to-day basis. And I thought that that was just me. However, I started researching it. And it turns out that 6.7% of the US population has major depressive disorder. 3.1% has generalized anxiety disorder. 3.5% has PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. 2.7% have panic disorder. 1% have obsessive compulsive disorder. And these are just some of the many disorders that psychologists classify as mental illnesses. If we look at a broader spectrum, 1 in 5 adults in the US experiences mental illness in a given year. So just to break that down for you guys, that's 20% of the entire US adult population. That's a ton. And 1 in 5 of youth ages 13 to 18 experiences a severe mental disorder at some point during their life. So when I was researching this, I thought, wow, these numbers are so high, much higher than I originally expected. So why aren't people talking about this? Why are physical disorders, physical illnesses so common, so easy to talk about? Oh, I go to the hospital because I break my leg, or I am receiving chemotherapy treatment because I have cancer. But nobody talks about how they're on medication for a psychotic episode. Nobody talks about how they go to group therapy 5 times a week because they need help working through their anxiety. Why are only 41% of adults in the US with a mental health condition receiving mental health services in the past year? 41%. Why are the numbers so low? I believe that that's because there's still a stigma around mental illness. When I was growing up, I watched a couple of movies in my public high school English classrooms. 2 of these movies were Girl Interrupted and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I know that some Biola courses even still feature One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as a part of their reading curriculum. And you guys may have watched some of these movies, but basically, to give you a rundown, both portray characters that are in psych wards, but they're just very kind of crazy. They're really outspoken in a lot of ways. A lot of them are violent. A lot of them can't perform socially, can't go to work, can't do normal things that we see. A lot of them have manic episodes and are honestly quite scary as a viewer. I'm wondering what has gotten into these people to make them act this way. And I don't think that that's a fair representation of people who are mentally ill. I don't think that 20% of all Americans who have mental illnesses act like these characters in these movies. Just to give you some statistics, one thing that really popped out to me is that 40% of all primetime normal characters are violent, but a whopping 73% of characters with mental illnesses on TV are violent. But that's actually not the case. Looking at studies, mentally ill people and normal people without mental illnesses are equally as likely to be violent. We also see this in the news. If we're not careful as journalists to pick careful language and be respectful of people who have mental illnesses, we get headlines like this from the Daily News. Get the violent crazies off of our streets. 12,000 1,200 killed by mental patients. If we use our language in such careless terms, we can label 20% of our population as violent crazies, and that's super isolating. A couple of semesters ago, I pitched a story to The Point magazine, which I'm currently the editor-in-chief of, and ended up editing an article about how people use mental disorders as adjectives in their everyday language. People say, "You almost gave me a panic attack," or, "Oh, yesterday I was feeling really depressed." When in reality, they're making light of these illnesses that people have. I don't go around saying, "Oh, I feel like I have tuberculosis this morning," or, "Oh, like last night, like I really felt like cancerous." So we just really need to start treating mental illnesses like physical illnesses. And I actually found this fun comic. On the top, the guy says, "I feel like I'm dying from a physical illness," and his friend says, "We need to get you to the hospital ASAP." And with a mental illness, he says the same thing, but his friend says, "Just try and remember, a lot of people have it a lot worse." So I believe that we have a current crisis today. It seems that millennials are more mentally ill than we have seen in previous generations. And I wonder, is that because we're talking about it a lot more, we're going on social media, we're making YouTube videos about it, or is it because the things that baby boomers they're saying things about us that are true, that we're lazy, that we're narcissistic, that all we care about is ourselves and our safe spaces that we create. So are we actually more mentally ill than previous generations? John Twinge says, "In past generations, suicide and depression were considered afflictions of middle age. But for Generation Me, these problems are a rite of passage through adolescence and young adulthood." The National Alliance on Mental Illness did a study on college students and their mental health. And with all the college students that they surveyed, 73% of them said that they have experienced a mental health crisis while in college. That's 3/4 of all college students, and that represents the majority of college students around the nation. That's really alarming. That's a ton of people. And the funny thing is that I have identified with a lot of these things on this list. And I mean, I know some of you guys have too. I hope that that's not the case, but I know that that's true. And I wonder, why weren't we seeing these numbers beforehand? Why is this only coming up now? Again, here's another visual that just demonstrates the significance of mental illness with our generation. As you can see, the arrow is pointing to the large percentage of people ages 18 to 25, and how that they have talked about major depressive episodes that are more frequent and more long-lasting than other people of generations. Psychology Today said the average high school kid has the same level of anxiety as an average psychiatric patient in the early 1950s. That's crazy to me. Have we really spiraled that far down in the past 50 years, 60 years? Manvi Singh from NPR says, "We can't really compare how depressed millennials are with how it was for our parents and grandparents when they were young. That's because researchers weren't very good at collecting data on mental illness back in the 60s and 70s when the baby boomers were in their late teens and 20s. So this suggests to me that mental illness has been an underlying issue for years and years and years, but we are just now starting to talk about it." So here's where I believe that social media comes into play. Are millennials more mentally unstable compared to previous generations? No, we're just talking about it more, and this is how we can remove the mental illness stigma. Just to illustrate this, here are some statistics that prove that we need to step up our game when talking about mental illness. 26% of homeless adults staying in shelters live with a serious mental illness. 20% of state prisoners and 21% of local jail prisoners have a recent history of a mental health condition. And 70% of youth and juvenile justice systems have at least one mental health condition, and at least 20% live with a serious mental illness. Because of the stigma, we are avoiding talking about these very real illnesses that affect people and ultimately lead them to not be able to go to work, not be able to perform socially. Society lacks because of people who are not getting the proper health care, and these statistics really illustrate that. And I believe that if we stepped up to the plate and talked about mental illness more, we would be able to get people the health care that they need and deserve. Here's just a visual of how many people in the United States are really affected by mental health. And here are some visuals of statistics that I've already talked about, but I just wanted to re-emphasize that depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. The Learning Center here at Biola has been really instrumental in my learning process because I can't go to school sometimes. I can't attend class because I have a panic attack or something like that. And so I can really identify with the fact that people are disabled and are unable to work and unable to make a living for themselves because of this illness. And because of that, America is losing $193.2 billion a year in lost earnings because of people who can't go to work. So I believe that if we were able to get people the proper access to health care, we would be able to cut that number down significantly. Additionally, 90% of those who die by suicide have an underlying mental illness. That means that if we were able to treat these people before they committed suicide, maybe those numbers would lessen dramatically. And this is just another outline of how many people don't receive the proper health care that they need on a given year. Mitch Preinstein, a psychologist at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, says, millennials are certainly using social media in a way that we haven't seen with other generations. They are not as shy about sharing their anxieties online. 28-year-old Kat Layton from North Carolina created the End the Stigma campaign, which is basically people who have badges that kind of announce their mental illness, and that really lessens the space for us. It makes the world smaller. It makes people more vulnerable. Walls come down. And by announcing the fact that I have depression or I have an anxiety disorder, it allows other people to relate to me and realize that they maybe too also suffer from these same things and they can get help as well. Aaron Jones created the hashtag Medicated and Mighty that's going around on Instagram, and that's basically the campaign to share a picture of a patient with their antidepressants to normalize the fact that medication is ready and available for those who have mental illnesses. And lastly, a controversial but very popular TV show has arrived on Netflix. It's called 13 Reasons Why. It's about a high school girl who committed suicide and I guess the legacy that she leaves. And some people have said that it glorifies suicide, that it's harmful for those with mental illnesses. But yet, there are very popular influencers that are a part of this story. Selena Gomez was the producer, and here are two of her castmates that were in the show, and they all got semicolon tattoos together. Tommy Dorfman, who is the guy in the middle, says, the semicolon symbol stands for an end of one thought and a beginning of another. Instead of a period, authors use the semicolon to continue a sentence. For us, it means a beginning of another chapter in life in lieu of ending your life. And I believe that even though that their show is controversial, by posting this on social media and by talking about it, they're sparking a conversation. And whether it is representing suicide in a good way or not, it's still starting a conversation. And I think that's the most important thing. As for me, how does this apply to me? I have a mental illness, yes. But am I going to let that define me for the rest of my life? No. But I do want to be able to use the talents that God has given me and the experience that God has given me to really open up the eyes of others and to talk about this and hopefully reduce the stigma of mental illness. Places like the Carter Center believe that informed journalists can have a significant impact on public understanding of mental health issues as they shape debate and trends with the words and pictures they convey. One day I hope to be a fellowship scholar with them, and basically the Carter Center encourages journalists to use their words in a way that does reduce the mental health stigma. They promote the use of words to reduce this. I also look up to Steve Lopez, a journalist of the New York Times, who told the story of the soloist who struggled with mental illness and was also living on the streets. I look up to Mary Carmichael from Newsweek, She wrote Growing Up Bipolar, and the story was on the cover, and I just took a lot of inspiration from her candidness and her vulnerability. And I also want to be an advocate for the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma. It's really real that journalists deal with crazy things. They have to report on crime. They have to report on violence. They get invested in the things that they're talking about. And it's really important that we pay attention to journalists and their mental health as well. Biola has taken me on a crazy journey. 2 of my internships have actually been in PR, but I'm a writing and publishing emphasis. Currently, I'm the editor-in-chief of The Point, but I've also worked in the Chimes and Eagle Vision. So basically all that to say that I don't know what God has in store for me. I don't know what his plans are, but I know that he's given me this platform and this experience for a reason, and I just hope to follow in what he has planned for me. Thank you so much for your time.